If you watched the last video, then you have these characters politely standing still, and you probably want to make them move around and stuff. So we're going to do some rigging to make that happen. I'll cover making an armature, setting up IK constraints, some other constraint stuff, weight painting tips, and plenty of other little things sprinkled in there. If you didn't watch the last video, then you're fired. This video should still help give you a basic understanding of how to put bones in a model to make it move around, whether it's a character or not. I will be going step by step in this one, so if you want a quick survey on a lot of different rigging concepts, then check this video out. I will have some new secret tips though, so it might be worth sticking around. First, let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, there are rigging add-ons that promise to speed things up for you, but here's the thing. You have to learn how to use those still, and if something breaks or if you want to make something that isn't human-shaped, you still need to know at least a little about rigging. This low poly model we made is human shaped though, so let's use Rigify for this, and for the next character, we'll make it completely custom built. To use Rigify, go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Rigify, enable it, and now when we press Shift A, we have these new armature options. Let's use the basic human meta rig. Now we just need to line these bones up with our model, and to see them a little easier, we can go down here to Object Data Properties. When it's selected, under Viewport Display, you can turn on In Front, and then we can see them a little better. I'll press 1 to look from the front, and with this still selected, S to scale. We're still in object mode for this. I'm going to line up the hip area. I'll press S and X to scale it out until the knees are kind of in the middle of the leg right there. And then when we're done scaling, we can press Ctrl A and apply the scale. Now I want to be able to see our vertices a little better too. So up here in overlays, we can turn on wireframe like that. Now we can tab into edit mode and we can start lining these up. So I like to scale up the whole torso area first. So to make that easier, we can click this button to turn this to active element. This is going to change our pivot point. You can also do that with the period shortcut. And so I'm going to select all of the torso bones, and let's select these two bones down here. So the way active element works is the last bone that you have selected, or the active selection, that's the one that everything is going to pivot around. So I selected the hips last, and now when we scale up, everything is scaling from the hips. So I'm just going to line up the head bone. The bottom of it is lined up with the bottom of the head. We can change the pivot point now back to median and drag this to the top of the head. And it's nice to only have to do one side, and you can see if I move this with G, the other side isn't moving. So we can turn on symmetry up here. So let's just select this part, press G to line it up with the middle of the arm. This one is going to the elbow. This part we can put at the wrist, and this part at the tip of the fingers right there. Let's press 7 to look from above, and we can line this up over here also. So that's just going to be the middle of the hand, the wrist area, the elbow like that, and the middle of the shoulder. It's nice to have a very slight bend in the direction, that you want the arm to bend like that. If you set it up going the opposite direction, it might give you bad results when you start posing things. You can also line the collarbone up just like that. Now we should look from the side and make sure that everything is lined up like, the spine and all that. So this I'll put in the center of the head. This is just going to be for the neck. And if any of these bones are getting in the way and you want to just hide them temporarily, you can, select them and press H to hide them like that. So if we want, we can hide all of these. When you want to bring them back, you can just press Alt H. But this will make it a little easier to, line the spine up like that. We should line up this part with the knee, and now the foot. This one I'll drag to this loop cut in the middle, drag this out to the front. And this bone that it gives you right here, that's for the foot roll. So basically we just want to line this up with, the edge of the foot. So we can bring everything back with Alt H like that and tab back into object mode. Now this is the topology that we had in the last video, and this should be enough to make it deform, and it's pretty easy to just, have a few loop cuts. But if you want to make this deform even better, there are some things that you can do, and I'll show you that really quickly. So make sure you're in edge select for this. We can select this loop with Alt and left click, and we can dissolve it with Control X. Now we can go into face select up here. I'm going to select these 3 faces like that, and we're going to press I to inset. All right, then we can look from the top Alt Z to go into X-ray mode, and I'll select these vertices right here and press GG to slide them to about halfway right there. The way I like to think about this is by looking at my own elbow, you can see that clearly on your elbow you have more skin than on the opposite side of your arm. And so we're kind of doing the same thing right here, where you have more vertices on the elbow than you do on the inside of the arm. And this leads to slightly better deformation, especially with a model as low poly as this. Now we could also add a loop here just to make it deform a little more cleanly. We can do the same thing with the hips if we want. And we can do the same thing with the knee as we did with the elbow. So I'll just select this again with Alt and left click, Control X to dissolve it. And then the knee, we have more skin on, our kneecap than we do on the back of our leg. So we're going to select the front and press I to inset. Then we can look from the side, go into X-ray mode, select these points and press GG to move it about halfway. And that's pretty much it. The foot we can leave like that. I just wanted to show you that really quickly. People do have other ideas of better shoulder topology and, how everything is supposed to line up. So if you're interested in that, you can look up some pictures on Pinterest and things like that. I usually like to search references there. Okay, let's unhide our rig. We can select it. And then if we go back to object data properties and scroll down, we'll have this Rigify option that the add-on gave to us. And now that everything is lined up, we can just press generate rig. And now we have this second armature that it gave us with all these new controls. And you can see over here, we have meta rig, which is the one that we just used. And we have the rig right here, which is the one that it just gave us. We can hide the meta rig. Now all we have to do is select our model, shift select the armature, Control P, and parent with automatic weights. Now we can give this a try by pressing Control Tab to go into pose mode, or you can change that up here and we can start moving things around. So I'll just select the hand and press G to move it, and you can see that it's deforming nicely. You can also press N to open up the side panel, and under this item tab at the bottom, we have all of these rig layers that it also gives us. But yeah, this is Rigify. It's pretty easy to use for human models like this. Play around with all of the different controls and, see what they do. And if you want to get started with animating real fast, you can check out my character animation for impatient people video. And by the way, if these weights don't look good for you and you need to weight paint, the bones that you're looking for are under bone collections. You can go down to ORG right here. These are the original bones, and these are the ones that actually deform the mesh. You can just press the star to only view those, and these are the bones that you need to weight paint. But I'll talk more about weight painting with the next character. All right, cool. Let's throw this character in the trash and get to the good stuff. We got Bezo the cat right here, and he desperately needs a skeleton. But first, let's fix up the topology. So first thing I'm going to do is come up here and turn on wireframe so we can actually see the real verts. And before I start editing this directly, I'm going to make a duplicate of this collection. In case we mess something up, we have something to go back to. So you can right click it and go to duplicate collection, and I'll hide the duplicate right here. Now I want to add some more loop cuts to this shirt right here so that it deforms a little better. And we should also pay attention to the topology of the arm underneath right here. You can see it has quite a few loop cuts compared to our coat right here, which doesn't have that many. And these should match up pretty closely. Otherwise, when the arm bends, the arm might poke through the clothes. Control R to add loop cuts, and we can use the scroll wheel to add 3. The shape changing as you add loops is just a thing that happens when you use the subdiv modifier. And if you want to be able to add loop cuts without changing the shape too much, you can check out the Final Topology add-on. It's the only add-on I've seen that actually tries to make this workflow easier. It's not free, but I think it's worth the money if you use it as much as I do. In this case though, we can just adjust things manually since the shape isn't changing that much. So I'll select this loop on the edge right here, and we can press Alt S to use the shrink and fatten tool to bring it in a little like that, just to round the edges off. If you want this to match closer, you can always turn the other collection on and off to, compare it. We can also add another loop cut right here. And again, I'll use Alt and left click right here and Alt S to round this out a little bit. And I'll tab back into object mode. I think this is good for the coat. Instead of adding loop cuts, you could always apply the subdivision surface modifier over here. But I think low poly models are much easier to weight paint, so I just like to add a few loops where I need them. Let's hide the coat with H, and we can try to add a few loop cuts on the legs right here. So Control R, use the scroll wheel to add maybe about 3 like that, and Alt S to round that out a little bit. Tab back into object mode. I'll press Alt H to unhide the coat, and I'm going to add a loop cut on the shoes right here. Control R, just so we have an extra loop to help our foot bend right there. I think the last thing I want to do is move the mouth to the middle. No, you don't really have to do this, but I think it's going to make it much easier to rig, and plus we can take advantage of some of the symmetry options when it's actually in the center. So let's select this, and in the N side panel right here, we can reset the location to 0. I'm just going to reset the rotation altogether with Alt-R, and then rotate it on the X by 90 degrees. And let's just bring it to the front like that. I'll tab into edit mode, and I'm just going to select these vertices right here and delete them like that. And then we can add a mirror modifier. So I'll just search for mirror and make sure that it's at the very top. I'm also going to add one more loop cut right here with Control R, and I'll just scale these ones on the end down a little bit. All right, let's move this down. All right, now we can start adding bones. So I'm going to press Shift A. You can go to Armature and just add a single bone right here. Now to see this through the model, we can go to Object Data Properties, the little running person, and you'll only see this if you have the armature selected. So you can click that, go down to Viewport Display and turn on In Front. I'm also going to turn on Names and Axes. This might look a bit cluttered right now, but we can always shut this off later. So let's look from the front, tab into edit mode, and we can start lining things up. So this is going to be for our hip, and I'm actually going to switch over to solid view and X-ray with Alt-Z, and we can line this up right around here with the bottom of the body, which is this sphere on the inside. And I'll put this at the top of the sphere. We can E to extrude, then press Z and bring it up to about the bottom of the head. This is going to be for the neck. And if you want to have more control in the shape of the back, you can subdivide this. Just right click and subdivide once. Let's select the top part of this bone right here, E to extrude, Z, and bring it to the top of the head. Now we can rename some of these as we're going. So we can select it and press F2, and I'll name this hips. This can be spine, neck, and head. This is going to help you stay organized as you go. Let's do the arms, so we can actually just select this joint right here, E to extrude, and bring it down right about there. This is like our shoulder, so I'm just gonna name it shoulder. And I actually don't want this to influence the mesh once it rigs up. This is just gonna help us control the arm. So if you don't want something to actually deform the mesh, go down to bone properties right here, and you can uncheck deform. And this just makes it so that when you do automatic weights, it just doesn't give it any weight at all. Now from here, we can extrude this on the X-axis like that, maybe up to the wrist. E to extrude, X. To add an elbow, I'll select this, right click and subdivide. Now I'll press 7 to look from the top, and we can set the hand up. So E and X, and I'm just going to select this and Shift D to duplicate. And I want this to be parented to the hand bone, so we can select this, Shift select the hand bone, Control P, and keep offset. That just means it's parented to this, so that when we go into pose mode, I can move it, and this moves also. Let's go back into edit mode though. And I just want this to be in the center of the finger, and I'll try to line it up with this line right here. You can Shift D to duplicate, and we'll just do that for each finger, and one for the thumb. And I'll just go through and make sure that these are actually lined up with the loop cuts on the finger. It'll just take a second. And luckily our hand is flat, so we don't really have to worry about positioning too much on the other axes, but we can, check it out like this. And if it doesn't look good to you, then you can adjust it slightly. If you're trying to rig a hand that isn't flat, it's probably going to help you a lot to use some of these snapping options. So I like to set this to volume right here. And then when you move a bone with G, you can hold Control, and it will try to snap it to the middle of whatever object you have selected. And this is going to help us a lot when I rig the hair, which is completely optional, but it's a good way to use that function. Now I'm going to name some of these bones. So for the arms, you could do arm 1 and arm 2. I like to do bicep and forearm. And again, you can press F2 to rename, or if you have bone properties open, you can just rename it up here. I'll name this hand. And for the fingers, it'll be quicker to use the bulk renaming option, so I'll just select all of them right here. I'll Shift select one so that it's the active selection, and you can press Control F2. This opens up batch renaming, and you can change this to bones. I want to set the name, and I want to replace it, so I'll choose new, and I'll just call this finger. And that should rename all of them. And then these two, I'll name thumb with Control F2. Okay. I'm only going to do one side because we can just copy everything to the other side when we're done. So next I'm going to do the leg. I'll press Alt-Z to go into X-ray mode. I'll select the spine bone, Shift D to duplicate, and this should already be parented to the hips so we don't have to reparent it or anything. Now I'll rotate this 180 degrees and just line it up. And you can just change the roll right here. I'm going to move this until the Z is pointing at us and the X is pointing to the side. So it looks like the Z is pointing away from us right now. And it seems like this should be negative 180. That looks good. And let's bring this down maybe a little bit, right about here. And it's a good idea for the arms and the legs to put a very slight bend in the bones right there. And that'll help us when we set up IK constraints. So I'll go back and actually do that for the elbow too. The arms are going to be moving this way like that. Push it this way very slightly. You don't have to do it a lot, just so it's not completely straight. Now I'll press 3 to look from the side and we'll do the foot. Select this, E to extrude, and I'll bring this down right here. You can see when we move it, it's changing the tail location over here. So we can just reset the Z to 0 and it should snap the tail to 0. It's E and Y, can put it right about here. And I'm actually going to duplicate this and move it back right here. And this is going to be for the heel, but this is just going to be a controller bone for later. So we don't want this to deform. And remember, if you don't want it to deform anything, you have to go to bone properties with it selected and uncheck deform. If you want to make sure a bunch of things are not deforming, you can just hold Alt as you press this and it will work for all the things you have selected. Let's rename some of these bones. Again, you could do leg 1, leg 2, or something like that, but I like to do thigh and calf. Another thing that's important is the bone roll. So the way that I like to do it, so I'll go into pose mode. I like it when the X is pointing in like the most commonly used direction. And what I mean by that is if you're in pose mode, you can select a bone, press R and then X twice. That will rotate it on the local axis. And you can see the leg is rotating like this, which is what I want. You know, a leg I think is going to rotate like this most often. We can do the same thing for the knee like that, and that works right. You know, you wouldn't really expect it to move like that. Your leg would be broken. Some people like to rotate it on the Z instead of the X, so you can do whatever you're most comfortable with, but whichever one you choose, make sure that it's consistent across your entire model, and this will just make posing a lot easier down the road. So let's go through and check things. For the heel, it makes sense that it's rotated that way. The foot makes sense like that. I think the hips and the spine and the neck and the head are all rotating in the right direction. I think for the arms, that's okay. And for the hands, I would like for it to be going up and down like that. And it looks like all the fingers, I want them to be curling up and down too, so that we can easily make a fist. So what we can do is just select all of them, make sure one of them is the active selection. And then in edit mode, you can change the roll while holding Alt, and you can see that it rotates all of them at the same time. So I think what we need to do is just reset all of these to 0. So we can type in 0 and hold Alt while you press Enter, and that will change all of them at the same time. Now, just to show you the power of making sure the roll is actually correct, let's go back into pose mode. Let's just select all the fingers right here. And when you change the pivot point up here to individual origins, or you can press period to change it to that. And now each one is rotating individually, and this is going to make it really easy to make fists. And I'll just change this back to median point. All right, let's go back into edit mode now, look from the front. And if you just want a simple rig with not a whole lot of detail, this amount of bones will actually work for you. I'm going to add a few more later on, but let me just show you how to finalize it right now. So let's select everything that's not in the middle, and we'll select the shoulder too. Right click, and under names, choose auto name left and right. And that's gonna make it so that everything on the left side has a .L at the end. And this is really important if you want symmetrical poses or if you wanna flip them from one side to the other. Now with all of these still selected, you can right click and choose symmetrize, and that's just going to copy everything to the other side. And if it had a .L, it will now have a .R at the end. Now let's go into object mode with Control Tab, select everything, make sure that the armature is selected last, Control P and parent with automatic weights. Now I'll turn the names and axes off temporarily. And if we select the armature and press Control Tab to go into pose mode, we should be able to move everything around now. So if this works for you and all you want is a very simple rig, then this might be enough. You can see we have some weird deformation right here, so I'm going to talk about how to fix that with some extra bones, a little weight painting and things like that. We're also going to add some bones to the face, and we're going to set up IK constraints. And just to explain the difference between IK and FK, FK is how things move by default. You start with parent bones and then you move to the children bones to pose everything. With IK, you can make child bones control parent bones. If you want, you can actually go up here to pose options and turn on auto IK. And you can see when I move the foot, it is kind of doing that. But this is kind of a hack, and when you actually animate things, it's not going to move in the same exact way. But Auto IK can be helpful sometimes if you just have a really simple rig and you want to pose it. Let's turn this off though. I'll select all the bones with A, Alt-G, Alt-R, and Alt-S to reset the location, rotation, and scale, and we can go back into object mode. Before adding bones to the face, I also want to talk briefly about bone collections. So you can see if you go to Object Data Properties, there is a section called Bone Collections, and this is a way for you to organize all your bones. So if we go into Edit mode right here, you could, for example, put the arms into their own collection. So I'll just select all of the arms, come over here and press the plus button, and then click Assign. We can double click this and just name it Arms. Notice that this has a little circle and this one does also. That means that these bones are part of both of these collections. And if you wanted to remove them from a collection, then you just select that collection with the bone selected and then click remove, and you'll see that that circle goes away. But I'm going to leave it in this collection, so I'll just press Ctrl Z. If you're using 4.1 like I am, then you can also nest collections. You can just drag and drop them, and you can see this little tooltip like that lets you drop it in. The eye will hide the bones in that collection, and the star will solo it like this. So we can do the same thing for the legs too. So I'll just select all of the leg bones right now, make a new collection, name it legs, and then we can assign it like that. If you want, you can get really specific with this and have different collections for the left side and the right side, different collections for only the hands. Later on, we'll probably put all of the IK controls in their own collection. All right, let's make some face bones now. So I'll look from the front. Let's select this bone, Shift D to duplicate. And I do have my snapping set to volume, so I'll just select the head of this bone right here, G, and then I'll hold Control to snap it to the eyebrow right there. I can select the other end and snap it as well. And then I'll hide this bone so we can see a little better. Let's check this from another angle, and it does look like it is inside pretty nicely. Let's make sure that axes and names are turned on. And again, I want to rotate this so that it's going to rotate in the X direction like the most often. So we can change the roll like this until the X is pointing at us. And as usual, you can go into pose mode to test this out. So R, X twice, and that's how it will be rotating most often. Let's go back into edit mode and duplicate this, put it in front of the eye. Now I'll just take this part right here and I'll drag it forward a little bit. Press S to scale, X and 0. That will flatten it on the X direction. We'll do the same thing for the Z, so S, Z, 0. And now this should be straightforward, and we can just line this up like so. The roll for this one is not as important, so I'll just reset it to 0. Let's look from the side and maybe go into X-ray mode and try to line this up so that it's kind of on the surface of this part of the eye right here. And later on, we'll add some constraints to make this easy to control. I'll also turn the length down. I'm just going to hold Shift while I do this so it moves a little more slowly. Again, I'll duplicate the eyebrow right there, bring it down to the mouth. Let's select the head right here, and we can set the X to 0 so it's dead center. And then we can just line it up and then line it up in this direction. I'll set the roll to 0 so the X is pointing at us, and then I'll subdivide this. It'll be pretty convenient to have a control bone that lets me move all of the mouth bones at the same time. So I'll just select the center one right here, E to extrude, Y, and I'll just pull it out like that. Now, because of the direction of these, this one should already be disconnected, but if it's not, you can press Alt-P and disconnect bone. And if it is connected, then these bones are probably facing the other direction, and you can just select them, right-click, and we have a switch direction option right here. This one is just going to control things, so we don't need it to deform anything, so we can select it, come down to this bone tab, and then uncheck deform. All right, let's add some bones to the hair now. And I think this will be easiest if we go back into object mode and we can select all of the pieces of hair and then the armature and then press slash and we can isolate all of those. Let's go back into edit mode, select this bone right here, Shift D to duplicate, and we can start lining it up with G and hold Control to make it snap like that. So G and Control, you can duplicate it and then hide this one right here. We can select this, G. And now because these are overlapping, it's possible that this won't actually snap to the center. So if you don't want to line it up like this and you do want to use snapping, then you can just go back into object mode and you can hide this one also, and then go back into edit mode and, it'll be a little easier for you. Let's duplicate this, do the last piece of hair. Let's hide this. Back in object mode, I'll hide this also, and then we can line this up a little easier. All right, let's unhide everything back in object mode with Alt H. So I'll select all of these, hold Alt while I change the role, and I want the X to be kind of pointing at us like this. Then we can right click and subdivide. And instead of lining this up just by eye, we can change the transformation orientation to normal like this, and this will make it a little easier to just push them up like that. Just make sure to set it back to global when you're done. Now we can go back into object mode, press slash again to unhide everything. So with all of these pieces selected, I can press Control F2, make sure this is set to bones. We want to set the name and we want to give them new names, and I'll just call them hair. This is going to be eyebrow, eye, mouth 1, mouth 2, and this one I'll call control mouth. Now I want everything to move with the head bone, so we just need to make sure that everything is parented up. So we can select all of these, shift select the head last, control P, and keep offset. Same thing with the eyebrow and the eye. And for the mouth, I want to make sure that this bone right here is parented to the control bone, so keep offset, and then the control bone we can parent to the head. Now for the eyebrow, the eye, and these two mouth bones, let's just select all of them, right click, names, auto name left and right, so all of them should have a .L now, and then we can right click and symmetrize to flip them to the other side. Now if you want to do more than this, you totally can. You could do the ears, the whiskers, the nose, whatever you want, but this is where I'm going to stop. We could also add all of these to their own collection, so I'll make a new one called face. And I'll make sure that it's inside this collection. And I'll just select all of the bones that we just made and all the hair and assign it like that. Next, let's add a few bones to the coat right here, just so that we have extra control for if, the coat is overlapping with the legs, things like that. We can control it separately. So I'll go back into object mode, select this right here, and we can turn off the subdivision surface modifier like that so that we can see the actual verts, and this will help us line things up a little better. Now let's select the armature, go into edit mode. I'll just duplicate the thigh right here, and then I'll press Shift H to hide everything else. Let's go up to the snapping options and turn on vertex snap right here. So I'll press G and hold Control. We can snap it right there. G and Control. So G and Control, and we'll change the roll afterward. All right, let's select this one in the front. And what I'm gonna do is make sure that the Z is pointing outward like that. So this one, I'll just reset to -180 so that it's, precise. And the other ones, I'll just kind of do by eye. That seems good. This one, I'll rotate like that, right about there. And then this one is probably going to be 0. Yep. Now I'll just select all of these, Control F2, and we can rename it something like coat or clothing or something like that. The ones that aren't in the center, we can select those, right click, auto name left and right, and then we can right click again and symmetrize those. Now, if you really wanted to, you could make it so instead of flaring out kind of like an umbrella, that they all kind of move in one direction or the other, but this is the way that I'm doing things. With these still selected, we can add these to their own bone collection. I'll click the plus and I'll name it clothing and assign. All right, next let's set up the IK for the leg bones. So just to make this a little easier to see, I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm just going to hide all of the bones on the right side, just so we don't accidentally select them when we're looking from the side like this. Now I'll go into X-ray mode with Alt Z, and I'll select this foot bone right here, Shift D to duplicate, and then right click to snap it back into place. Now I'm doing this to keep the same orientation right here, but to make it easier to see, we can change the length over here like that. I'll just make it a little smaller and I'll name it ik.leg.l. And this isn't going to be deforming anything, so make sure that deform is unchecked. Also make sure this isn't parented to any of the leg bones, so you can press Alt P and clear parent. If it is parented to any of the leg bones, you'll get this issue where the leg will just start spinning around like crazy, and that's because of a dependency loop where two bones are looking at each other and trying to follow each other's movement. Now to set up the IK constraint, we have to go into pose mode. And we have this situation now where there's one bone inside of another, and it can be kind of annoying to select. But if you hover over two bones and you press Alt and then left click, it will give you this option to select one of them. So we can just select the IK bone now and then shift select this calf bone right here. And there are a few ways to add the IK constraint. You can do the first with Shift I. That's one way. You can do Control Shift C, and that will just give you this constraint menu. Or you can go down to bone constraints right here. There are two of them. One is constraints, one is specifically for bones. So make sure you're on the bone one, and you can choose inverse kinematics right here. but I'm gonna do Shift I like that. And now if we select the IK bone right here, you can see that it is acting a little differently, but it's trying to move the entire body. So what we can do is again, select this yellow bone right here and change the chain length to 2. If you have it set to 0, it's gonna try to control as much as it possibly can. We know the chain length should be 2 because we just wanna control this bone and this bone right here. Just to see a little better, I'm going to turn the names and axes off for now. I'm going to set the foot up in a pretty simple way, but if you want something a little more advanced with like toe pivoting and stuff like that, then you can check out this tutorial that I already made about making a foot rig. Go into edit mode, select the IK bone right here. And if you have names off, you can still see the names up here of the one that you have selected. So I know this is ik.leg.l. Anyway, select that, then shift select the heel, Control P, keep offset. And if we select the hips and move the hips down, you can see that the leg is kind of staying in place, but I don't like how the foot is rotating. So we can make it so that this foot bone always matches the rotation of this IK bone right here. So select the IK bone, shift select the foot bone, Control Shift C. Remember, this is the shortcut for adding constraints. And then we can choose copy rotation. And the last bone you select, that's the bone that always gets the constraint added to it. And if you want to tweak any of these settings, just open up bone constraints with that bone selected, and you can see that it's copying it in world space. Once we fix the weight painting, we can actually have some decent heel pivoting. We also have this other issue where the knee will flip backwards if we move it to certain parts. So to prevent this, we can set up a target bone. Let's go back into edit mode, and right here, select the knee, E to extrude, Y, and we can just bring this out like that. I'll press Alt P to clear the parent, and we can just bring this out right here. And we can name it target.leg.l. And for easier control, I like to parent this to the heel. So Control P, keep offset. Now back in pose mode, you can see we have this section for a pole target. We just need to select the armature, and then the bone, we just named it target, so I can just search for target like that. And now this is flipping sideways, so we can just change the pole angle right here. It should be 90 like that. You just want it to be pointing in this direction. Now let's give it a test. And you can see that it's working properly. And if we rotate the leg from the heel, because this is parented to the heel, it should rotate properly like that too. I'll reset the pose with Alt G and Alt R. And so we don't have to set this up on the other side. What we can do is go into edit mode, Alt H to unhide the bones on this side. And I'm actually just going to delete all of these leg bones over here with X. And we can select all of the leg bones on this side, right click and symmetrize. So this should work fine now for both sides. Let's add these bones to a new collection, so we can press the plus. I'll call this IK. Let's select all of the bones that we're using for the IK. So I'm just going to hide a few of these bones to make it easier to select. I'll select the heels, this bone right here, and the target. Let's remove it from this and from the legs and assign it to the IK right there. Honestly, we don't even really need to see these, so if you want, you can just make another one that's just called like mechanism or something like that. And sometimes I do this for bones that you don't really need to see, but you need to have them to make things work. So I'll just select these, assign it, and then remove it from the other one. And then we can just hide it afterwards, so we don't need to see those. All right, let's turn the other bone collection back on, Alt H, so we can see those. Let's do this for the arms now too. So in edit mode, I'll just, again, delete everything on this side. I'll duplicate the hand right here, shrink the length very slightly, and I'll rename it ik.arm.l. Alt P to unparent it. Back in pose mode, with that still selected, we can shift select this bone right here, Shift I, and add to active bone. Let's make sure that's selected, go over to bone constraints, set the chain length to 2, because again, we only have these 2. If you want, you can set it to 3 and it will control the bone right here, but I'm gonna leave it set to 2. And I do like how the elbow is pointing this way, but we should also add a pole target for this too. So I'll press Alt G to reset the location. Back in edit mode, we can just extrude from the elbow right here, E and then Y. Select that, Alt P, clear the parent, and I'll just pull this out very slightly. Now back in pose mode, we can select this yellow bone right here, Under pull target, select the armature, and then the bone we forgot to name, so come back over here, F2, target.arm.L, and then we can add that bone here by searching for target. And again, it might rotate weird, so we just have to rotate it until it's pointing the right way. And we can use this to change the rotation of the arm like that. So let's just select everything over here, right click and symmetrize. If we wanted to move our whole character around, we'd kind of have to do that in object mode like this, but sometimes it's nice to be able to do that from pose mode. And to do that, we need a bone that's higher than the hips that we can parent some of the unparented bones to. And people usually call that the root bone. So you can add one of those in edit mode with Shift A. I'll just look from the side, select the tail of the bone, R, X, and 90. And I'll just reset the roll right here and change the length to something a little smaller, like maybe 0.5. And with that selected, press F2 and name that root. Now we have a few bones that are just not parented to anything. So we could parent the hips to this bone, Control P. Now we get to decide if we want to parent these IK arm bones to the hips or to the root bone. Basically, if we parent it to the hips, when we move the hips down, the arms will follow. Sometimes I'll even add an extra bone just for controlling the entire torso so that you kind of have the option to do either. You know what, let's do that really quickly. In edit mode, I'll just Shift D to duplicate the hips and I'll turn the length up so it's bigger and I'll call this control.torso. We can select the hips, parent it to that big bone right there with keep offset. And then the torso bone, just make sure that is parented to the root also. Let's select all of these arm IK bones right here. If you want to shift select a bone that's nested within a bone, you can hold Alt and Shift like that, and it'll keep the previous selection. Now we can select the torso bone, Control P, and keep offset. Now we can test it out back in pose mode. So now if we want, we can, move the hips like this and the hands will stay in place, or we can move the entire torso like that. With the root bone, some people prefer to put this in kind of like the center of gravity, which would be closer to the hips. So if you wanted to, you could just like bring this up a little, and this would be good for, if you want to make your character do a flip or something like that. But just for clarity, I'm going to leave it down here for now. We can make this easier to look at in a few different ways. The way that I usually do, because I think it's kind of the least amount of work, is just coming over here to Object Data Properties. Under Viewport Display, you can see we have Display As. We can set that to any of these things. So if you set it to stick, this is a lot more minimal and easy to look at. I prefer B-bone, and this is for displaying bendy bones, which we'll add to the arms a little later. And right now this looks like way too blocky, but you can change how thin or thick these are individually. And you can do that under bone properties right here under bendy bones. If you have bones selected, you can hold Alt while you change the display size right here like that. Usually what I do though is just select everything, press F3 and search for B bone. You can see we have this option scale B bone. I use this a lot sometimes when I'm setting things up. So what I'll do is right click it and add it to my quick favorites, which just means whenever you press Q, you'll have this option right here and that lets you scale it up or down. So I like to make all these pretty thin, except for some bones that I use for controlling a lot. So for like the IK hand bone right here, what I could do is press Q now to access the quick favorites, and you can just scale that up to be a little bit bigger. And it's easier to select now. And because this one's longer, you can also select the hand separately. But I'm going to press Control Z so that I can select both of these and scale them up at the same time. Alt Shift, left click, IK arm, Q for the quick favorites, and we can just scale both of these up. We could do the same thing for this torso bone right here. Q, scale that up like that. I'm actually going to go into edit mode and just make this whole bone shorter. So I'll just turn the length down. Again, you can press F3 to do this and search for B bone, or you can add it to your quick favorites like I did. Let's fix some of the parenting now because, these bones are not actually set up to have any weights. So we can just go into object mode, select the coat again, shift select this, Control P to parent. Now again, this is already parented, but if you do this after adding new deform bones, it'll kind of reset the automatic weights. So we can go back to automatic weights right here. We can see it's working a little bit. So this is when we would start getting into weight painting to fix some of those issues. But first, I'm also going to parent some of the face parts because right now these are also not doing anything to the face. So we can select the eyes, shift select the armature, control P, parent with automatic weights. I think for the hair, we can actually join that together. All of these have the same modifiers, as you can see. So let's just select all of these and control J, and that will join them into a single object. Parent that with automatic weights. Can do that with the eyebrows, and we can do that with the mouth. All right, now we can actually start weight painting and testing out some of our weights. So let's go into pose mode and we can start moving these around. It looks like this part of the eye is working okay. That one is parented up all right. Let's just move the control bone. So it seems like one of these bones is actually controlling the collar. So let's fix that. Let's select the armature, shift select the object that you want to weight paint, and you can press Control Tab to go into weight paint mode, or you can go to this menu up here and go into weight paint. Now, when you do this with the armature selected, you'll have this option up here with the bone that you can see, and this will let you Alt and left click to view a bone's weight like that. And you can also pose them with G, R, and S. So let's look at some of the weight painting settings we have, because I think some of the default settings confuse people. So let's go over here to the tool tab, and I like to, at the bottom under options, turn on auto normalize. And it makes it so that if you add weight with one bone, it will remove it from another bone. As you can see, these bones keep removing the weights from each other like that. This just makes it so that two bones don't really conflict with each other. I like to make sure that symmetry is on, so you can either set that up here or you can set it up here. Let's just clear all of these weights by resetting this to 0 and drawing like that. Now, when you have front faces only turned off, that means you can paint all the way through the mesh like this. You can see that it's painting through to the other side. If I have it turned on, now it shouldn't go to the other side at all. And then under fall off, we have the fall off shape. You can set this to sphere. So if you have something that's really thick, it won't go all the way through it. But if you have it set to projected, it will go all the way through very thick objects. But now that you know what they do, you can turn them on and off if you need to. We can also change the weight up here. We can change the radius, but I like to change the radius with F right here. So since we want to remove weights so that none of the mouth bones actually affect the coat, basically what we need to do is click the bone where we actually want it to be assigned, and then we can turn the weight up to something like 1. I'll make the brush a little smaller, and we can start painting this in. And while we're doing this, it should be removing it from the mouth bones up here because of auto normalize. So let's just paint it in like that. And it looks like we got some over here. So let's turn the weight down to 0. We can paint that. We can rotate with R to test it. Let's check the hair. It seems like there is some weird stretching, so we can fix that also. We just have to go back into object mode, select the armature, and then shift select the hair, and then go back into weight paint mode. Let's press the slash button so that we can isolate this again. Now, because of the overlapping, this is a good time to talk about masking. So we have these other two options up here. You can actually press 1, 2, and 3 to switch between them, just like vertex, edge, and face select mode. This first one is for face masking, the second one is for vertex select, and the third one is just for posing. So you can see when we're set to masking, everything goes gray and we can't actually paint anywhere. What this is doing is paying attention to what is selected in edit mode. So I'll hover over one of the points and press L to select it, and then we can tab back into weight paint mode, and you can see that this is the only thing that's selected. One thing that might throw you off is if you try to select a bone with Alt, you can see that it's just going to change the selection. So you do have to go back into the pose mode right here to select the bone. And then you can press 1 to go back into masking. And now we should be able to turn the weight all the way up and paint this without affecting anything else. Let's also paint this one right here. I'll set the weight to 0.5 and paint that right here. Click on the bone, select this bone right here, go back into mask mode, and just make sure that this is 0.5 also. If you want, you could make it so that this is deforming it completely. It's also going to deform differently if you have your armature modifier first. You can see that if I move it while it's deformed, it will change quite a bit. So usually I like to have it so that the armature modifier is before the subdivision. This usually leads to more smooth deformation, but just choose the way that looks best to you. All right, back in edit mode, let's press Alt A and we can deselect that. Let's select this second piece of hair now and go back into pose mode. Select this right here. Press 1 to go into masking, and then we can paint this bottom part right here. And I'll set the middle part to 0.5 again. Let's test it out. It looks like some of this bone is still messing with the middle piece of hair, so I'm just going to move it to the side like that. Turn the weight down all the way. I'll make the brush bigger, and we can just weight paint it like that. Let's check this other piece of hair. It seems like that's influencing it too. So again, I'll just move it far away for now, and then I'll weight paint it like that. Again, we can reset everything with A, Alt G, and Alt R. I'll fix up this last piece of hair. Just select this whole piece with L. Select this one right here, go into masking, paint all the way through. This can get a little bit tedious, but you get used to it over time. And depending on how your character is shaped, you might not have to do this at all. I made a character that has a lot of parts that are really close together, so we're gonna have to do a fair amount of weight painting for this. But it won't be too hard because of how low poly the character is and because we still have a lot of modifiers. For example, if you moved the Armature modifier to the very end and then applied all of these modifiers right here, so it was a mirror, a solidify, and a subdivision. Now you have all of these points to deal with, plus the solidifier made it so that there are points all the way inside. And again, that's one reason why I like to put the Armature modifier as close to the top as I can. But let's go back into pose mode and test some more stuff out. So let's move the arm right here. It does look like the arm is poking through a little, but I think we can actually fix this by just using bendy bones. And remember that I have the bones set to display as B bones, and that just means bendy bone. So if we select these arm bones right here, I'll just select all of them like that. We can go to bone properties, and under bendy bones, I'll hold Alt as I turn this up. So I'll just turn this up to something high, like 10. And this will make the bones more curvy without you having to add a whole bunch of bone segments. Now, if you have the display set to something else like octahedral, you won't actually see the difference in the bones, only in the way that it deforms. B-bone is the only way that you can actually see, how many segments there are. It is still poking through a little bit, so we can just push this to the limit where it's really bad. Let's select the hand right here, go over to modifiers, and see if moving this above the subdivision fixes it, and it seems like it does. We should actually just run through some of the other objects and make sure that the armature is above everything, except for the mirror modifier. Let's do that with the shoes also. We can do that for the mouth. The eyes, it's not really going to matter too much, but I think it's good practice to actually do this. Now we do have an issue with the whites of the eyes right here because we made it with a shrink wrap modifier. So basically as it's deforming, it's trying to shrink wrap at the same time, and this is going to mess things up. So we can actually just apply this. And because I've been duplicating the collections as I go, I can always revert this change if I really need to. And it seems like the eyes are now following the head. And don't forget, we also have this secret torso under here, so I'll push that to the top also. If you really want to, you can just hide this or delete this, but I'm going to leave it here, specifically because if I make the character crouch or if I lift up the legs, you'll be able to kind of see up the shirt. So I think this will be good for setting to the same color as the pants. The coat deforms pretty terribly right now, so let's fix that up. I'll just select everything, Alt G and R. I'll go into edit mode. I'll select all of the coat bones that are on the side right here, and I'll parent them to the thigh. So now when the leg moves, those bones should follow. We can do the same thing to the other side. Just parent all those to the thigh like that. And these two bones, I'm going to keep parented to the hip right here, which they're already parented. So now in pose mode, let's lift one of the legs up like that. And we should be able to take this center one right here and just lift this up a little like that to make it so that it's not clipping in too bad. But we can also do some weight painting to make this deform a little bit better because I don't think the weights need to be going as far up the body as they are. So let's reset all of this. Select the armature, shift select the coat right here, go into weight paint mode, and I'll start tidying up the weights. A thing you can also do instead of using face masking is just go into edit mode, and you can actually just hide things in here. So I'm gonna make sure that X-ray mode is turned on. I'm just gonna select the back half right here and press H, and now we don't have to worry about painting through onto other stuff behind us. So let's select this bone in the front right here, and I'll just start painting through to the other side. Let's maybe turn these modifiers off to see a little better, and I'll just do this going around. I just want to make sure that this bottom ring of faces and any of these points inside are getting weight painted. Select that right here. That seems good. Anything higher than that, though, I don't really want it to be affecting it. So this front bone right here, we can turn the weight down and start painting to remove those. Now, if you had it set up like me, then this should be mirroring to the other side. Let's tab back into edit mode, Alt H to unhide that, and I'll select all of this side now and we can hide that. Go back into weight paint mode and we can keep doing what we're doing. Let's unhide everything, turn these modifiers back on. It It looks like part of the problem is that the weights are attached to the leg also. Select the leg bone right here, and I'm actually just going to remove all of these weights. And it seems like it didn't add it to any of the clothing bones. It probably added it to one of these bones right here. And it looks pretty good to me. This is basically how I work, is I just run through bones, try to make sure they're deforming correctly. It looks like when we move our arm, it's actually making some of the whiskers move. So let's go back into object mode, select the armature, select this part of the face right here, go into weight paint mode. Let's paint it so this whole thing is being controlled by the head bone right here. So select the head bone with Alt and left click, turn your weights all the way up. Make sure your strength is all the way up too, and then we can paint this, and then we'll test it to see if it's moving still. This part of the head is moving, so we can just do the same thing. Select the armature, shift select the head, go into weight paint mode. Let's weight paint this so the whole thing is following the head also. And now this isn't really messing with it, which is nice. It looks like the body is clipping through a little bit. So instead of weight painting the body on the inside, we could also just go into object mode, select the torso right here, and in edit mode, I'll press S and Shift Z, and we can just make this thinner until it's not really clipping through. We should fix the way the foot is deforming now. So let's go back into object mode, select the armature, shift select the foot, control tab, go into weight paint mode. Let's just select this foot bone right here, and I'm actually just going to paint everything red for now. So this is what it'll look like if we move the heel. I kind of want the upper part of the shoe right here to follow this leg bone. So we can tab into edit mode, select this part up here with L, go back into weight paint mode. Let's select this bone right here and then turn masking on, and we can just paint this whole thing red. Now let's go back to posing, move this around. I like how it follows the leg like that. Or if you want, you could edit the armature and just move the pivot point up to a spot like this so that it pivots a little higher like that. This is a pretty stylized character though, so I'm not too concerned. Now I want the toe to deform a little too so that we can have the foot actually bend. So select that bone with the weights turned all the way up. I'll just start painting. I'm just gonna paint into the tongue of the shoe for now too. And we can test it out a little bit. I'll set the weight to 0.5 and we'll see how that looks. I think that looks pretty good. Now, if the tongue deforming like this is bothering you, you have a few options. One is you can just weight paint it until it looks good. And the second option that I can think of is you give it its own bone like we did with the clothing. Adding another bone is gonna give you the most control, but I think what I'll do is I'll just mask it out in edit mode. So I'll just make sure that the tongue is selected. I'll just reset the pose, turn masking on like that. A thing I also like to do is just move the other foot into a different spot where I can see it actually deforming, like that. Let's maybe select this leg bone, turn masking on. And what I'll do is turn the strength down to something like 0.2. So the weight is set to 1, but every time I start painting, it's going to add 0.2. So I just let go, I start painting again, it adds another 0.2. So you can do this to add weight gradually. And I'm gonna add more weight to only the underside of the tongue, so I'll just make this brush quite a bit smaller, like that. And this should hide some of the mistakes. When the foot is like this, it starts to kind of go through. So let's try selecting this bone and adding some weights to the top like that. And we can see it's kind of starting to come through now. I think that's looking okay enough for me, but again, if you want maximum control, you can just add a few more bones in here. The last thing I want to do is make it a little easier to control some of these face bones, because right now, if we want to, we can control the eyes like this, and I think it looks okay until we move around. Notice that these are not snapping to the surface. So we would have to come in here and like bring this back like that. There's actually a much easier way to control this. So I'll just reset those bones with Alt G and Alt R. So with this bone selected, I'll go to bone constraints right here and I'll choose shrink wrap. So now we can actually make this snap to another object. If we want, we could make it snap to the eye right here, like that. And we can make it rotate depending on the angle of the eye. So we can turn on align to normal right here. And I think we need to set this to Y, like that. And now as we move it, it will rotate. Right now it's looking a little weird because the bones are completely straight like this, but our eyes are not actually angled in that direction. An easy way to fix this is making it so that the position of this bone is its default position. And the way we can do that is by applying it as the rest pose. So we can just press F3 and look for rest pose. And you can see we have apply selected as rest pose. When we do that, the eye will snap back to its default position, but the bone will stay the same. And if we go in edit mode, you can see that it's rotated also. This one is not yet, and we'll just duplicate it over to the other side. But now we should be able to move this around. It's changing rotation, and it's snapping to the surface right here too. If you think it's going too far into the surface, you can change the distance like this. And you'll also notice that if you try to bring it too far back, it's actually going to snap to the back side of the eye. So what I like to do is actually make a separate object for shrink wrapping, and that's actually really easy to do. We can just go back into object mode. I'll select the eye, and I'll also select this mouth part right here, because we're going to do the same thing for these mouth bones right here. I'll just Shift D to duplicate them, and then press slash to isolate them like that. So I want to join these together, but I don't want them to share all the same modifiers, so we have to apply some of them. So let's apply the solidify right here, and we can get rid of the smooth by angle because we're not going to be seeing it anyway. This is just going to be for our bones to reference. Now we'll select the eyes, Shift select the mouth, and press Ctrl J, and this will join them into a single object. We can just name this shrink wrap. I'll just hide this part of the mouth for now with H. And I'll select this vert in the back, and I'll just delete it like that. So the eye has nothing to snap to now on the other side. Alt-H to unhide everything. We can go back into object mode. To find it in the outliner, we can hover over it and press period on the numpad, and then we can just make sure that it's not visible in the render or in the viewport like that. Press slash to bring everything back, and with the eye selected, go to bone constraints. Instead of the target being the eye, we can just search for shrink wrap, and now it's shrink wrapping to that object that we have hidden. It shouldn't snap to the backside of the eye now, and if it's snapping to any other part that you don't like, then you can just turn the shrink wrap object back on, and we can just delete some of these in here. So I'll just expand this selection like that and delete all of these faces on the top. Hide it again, press slash, and it's a little better. In edit mode, let's just delete this bone like that, and we can just symmetrize this one. And now our eyes are much easier to control. Let's do the same thing for the mouth right here. So with that selected, we can go to bone constraints, add a shrink wrap, look for the shrink wrap object like that. We can make this align to the normal also, set this to Y. And if you don't want it to move at all, then you can apply the selected as rest pose like that. But for the mouth, I'm going to leave it. I think that's fine. And now we should be able to move the mouth to the side. We can rotate it a little, make the character smile or frown or whatever we want. And we don't have to do a lot of extra work to get it to rotate correctly, which is nice. If you want to keep this torso object right here, you could just make it the same color as the pants. So I'll do that really quickly. Just like in the last video, I just go to UV editing. I'll select the pants, and then I'll select that object, tab into edit mode, select everything. You can see that we have one on the white and one on this color over here. So I'll just select the white part and move it over. Now it's the same color. And now it just kind of looks like an extension of the pants, which is nice. Now we can talk about some posing options. So I told you that it's important to put .L and .R at the end of bones, and that's so that you can use symmetry. So right now, if we move our hand, you know, the other side isn't moving, but if we want now, we can turn on symmetry up here, and the other side should move because all of the bones are named properly. Another thing you can do when this is turned off, let's just reset this. You can make an asymmetrical pose. And now let's select these bones, and we can copy the pose with Control C, and we can flip it to the other side with Control Shift V. So that basically just made it symmetrical, but let's flip the pose completely. So I'll just press Control Z. I'll select everything with A, again, Control C, Control Shift V, and that will flip the pose. You can Control V to paste it, Control Shift V to paste the pose, but flipped. This is really useful for posing and doing animation. Let's reset this with Control G, Control R, Control S. We made sure that the bone roll looked good for all of our bones, and that makes it so that for chains of bones like this, it becomes much easier to curl them around. Basically what you can do is you can just select all of them, press period to change your pivot point to individual origins, then press R, X, and we can actually curl all of these at the same time into a fist like that, which is really useful. I use the local rotation a lot. You can actually change the default up here. Right now it's set to global, but you can change it to local so that you can just press R and X. This just makes it so you don't have to press X twice to go into local rotation. And you can actually see in the upper left corner whether it's on the local X or if it's on the global X like that. And with the mouth too, we could make a really easy frown or a smile by turning on symmetry and then rotating this on the local X-axis like that. Right now our character is still made of a bunch of separate objects, and that's okay, you can leave it like this, but if you want to start applying modifiers and joining objects together, you can do that now, and because the weight painting is already done, it shouldn't mess anything up. If we select our coat, we can see all the modifiers right here. Anything that is before the armature modifier, that's safe to apply. So we could apply this and you can see that nothing has really changed. The solidify, we can apply that and you can see that it changes very slightly, but it's not changing too much. Generally, I think that it's okay to apply the solidify after the armature modifier. But if we have a subdiv that's after the armature and we apply that, you can see things get kind of broken. Just so I don't mess anything up, I am going to duplicate this collection also. So anything before the armature I'm applying, and I'll apply all the solidify modifiers too. Everything has the same modifiers now, so it should be safe to join everything together. I'll just select the coat, press A to select everything else, and press Ctrl J, and everything will be joined into a single object now, except for this shrink wrap object. I know this is a lot to take in, so you can check out this playlist for some more rigging videos. And I'm sure you want to know how to animate these, so you should watch these videos next to learn all about that. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.